Hey guys, welcome to Tech Notebook, and in this video we will be creating the Create Short URL view for our Django Short URL project. So let's get started. So right here what we will need to do is to create a new file in the URL short folder, and we will need to call that forms.py. And we will be creating an empty file. So this file will house our form that we will use to ask the user for the original URL that they want to shorten, and I will put up a picture of that page right here. So now what we will need to do in this file is to import two things. The first thing we will need to import is from.models import short URL, and that will basically import the model, our short URL model from models.py, and we will also need to import model form and forms from Django. So to do that, we'll just need to type in from Django import forms. So now we're going to have to create a class to house our actual form, and I'm going to call that class create new short URL. So class create new short URL, and this will inherit from forms.modelForm in Django. So just forms.modelForm. And what this model form thing is it's Django's implementation of forms, which will allow us to shorten our code and not have to write out these thousands of lines that it probably took to create this form class. Just put a colon here. So now we'll need to create a new class. We'll call this class meta, and you will need to do this exact same thing. Put a colon and enter. So now in this class what we will need to first type in is model. So model equals, and then we'll need to type in short URL. So we're basically telling the class that the model is short URL, and we're able to do this since this actually inherits from model form, and that's basically shortening the amount of code that we have to write. Now we'll need to add the fields that this form will have, and our form will only have one field, which is the actual URL. So now we'll just need to type in fields, set that equal to curly braces, open up quotation marks inside here, and right here we'll need to type in original underscore URL. I'm pretty sure that's what we put into our models.py. Let's just check real quick. Yep, that's what we called it, original URL. And we're basically naming the model field that this will be. And now the third thing we will need to do is to define a widget. So the widget will basically be our actual form element. So that way we can put CSS classes and other styling so that it just doesn't look like a generic HTML site. So what we'll need to do for that is just create a dictionary, call that widgets equals, open up the curly brackets, and in here what we'll just first type in is original underscore URL, put a colon. Right here we'll need to type in form dot text input, and you need to open up parentheses, and in here we'll need to type in attrs. And attrs basically stands for the attributes, and in here we won't be able to define the CSS classes that we'll be using. So put attrs, set that equal to another dictionary, and in this dictionary what we'll need to type in is open up quotation marks and type in class. So we're defining our CSS class, and in here we'll just need to type in, we need to open up quotation marks again, and in here we'll need to type in form dash control, which is the bootstrap class that we will be using. And let's just check if we have the proper ending. We have a quotation mark, a curly bracket, and a parenthesis. And finally, we have this curly bracket to end it off. So now we're done creating our forms.py file. So now you will need to go back into your views.py file, and we will need to import a few things. The first thing we will need to import is our form that we just created. So we'll need to do from.forms import create new short URL. And the reason why we can do this is because we define create new short URL as a class. Now we will need to import datetime, because if we go back into our models.py file, you see that there is a time date created field, and we will need to populate that. So to populate that, we will need to get the current date, and to do that, we'll use the Python datetime module. So we'll need to do from datetime import datetime. And now finally, we'll need to import random and string so we can create our random characters that are required for our URL. So now we need to type in import random, comma, string. And we should be good with our imports. So now right here, we will need to type in inside our create short URL function. We'll first need to delete that pass statement that I had in here before. And then we'll need to type in if request.method equals post and add a colon at the end. The reason why we have this statement here is because we want to discern whether the request is a post request or a GET request. So just as a brief refresher, let me just add a comment here. So a post request is used for things like usernames and passwords, where we don't want the information in the URL. And GET requests, so let me type that in, and GET requests are used for searches or other queries to the website that can be openly published in the URL. So for example, we would have google.com/search, and you'll be searching for tech notebook. So this is fine to be published in the URL because this isn't sensitive information like a username and a password. So this function will actually be executed 2 times. When we're using a GET request, the browser is trying to render the form and get all the HTML from the site, and that will not be using a POST request. Then the second request that this function will get is a POST request because the browser is actually submitting the form, and that could be potentially sensitive data. And we're using a POST request because we don't want to put that in the URL. So now what we'll need to type in is form equals create new short URL. We need to open up parentheses, and in here we'll need to type in request.post in all caps. And so basically, what this will do is it will create a new form. The reason why we have this line of code is so that we can create a new form with all the information from request.post, which would be from our previous form, because the data from the previous form is sent using a POST request and the entire form is not sent. So in order to access data from this form, we will need to create a new form with all the data from request.post inside of it. So now we'll need to type in if form dot is underscore valid, open parentheses, close parentheses, and colon. So this is one of the methods that comes with our form because we use the create new short URL class. So this is valid method. We'll basically check if the form has data in it, if that data is of the right type, and many other things that Django has predefined for us. We don't have to create this. So now in here, what we'll need to type in is original website equals form.cleaned_data. And we'll need to open up square brackets, and in here we'll need to type in original_URL. So now what we'll need to do here is to create a random character list because we want to actually start creating our short URL characters. So to do that, what we'll need to first type in is random_chars_list equals list of string dot ASCII _letters. And this will just basically return all the letters in the alphabet. So now we need to create an empty string, and I'm going to call that random chars. So random_chars equals open quotation marks and close quotation marks. So now I'm going to create a for loop and use that to create a 6-character short URL. So now what we need to first type in is for I in range 6. We'll need to do random_chars plus equals random.choice random chars list. So what this line does is it will append the random.choice, which will be a random element in random chars list. So it'll basically be a random letter, and it will append that to the end of random chars. So now what we'll have to do is we'll create a while loop so that we can check if that URL has been repeated before. So now we need to create a while loop. So what we can do is we can just copy this statement right here, copy that, paste that right here, and put it inside parentheses, and put a len right out here to check the length. We need to replace this with random_chars, and while that is not equal to 0, we basically need to repeat this over again. Just indent that in, and when it finally is equal to 0, then it will quit this loop. So now we need to actually start creating our short URL object. So now we need to create a datetime object, and to do that we'll just need to type in d is equal to datetime.now, and we need to open parentheses and close parentheses. And now we're actually going to create a short URL object. So I'm going to say s equals short URL, open up parentheses, and original_URL equals original website. We're just matching this to this. Now the next field is short URL. So let's just go check short URL. So we need to set short URL equal to random chars. And finally we have a date time, and that field name is called time date created. We need to just type in time _date _created. And we just set that equal to D, which is our current date. So now I'm just going to make this a bit more readable by indenting it on a new line. So now what we're going to have to do is type in s.save. So it will just save our ShortURL object to our database. And now finally we will need to render our URL created web page. So what you need to do is just type in return render. And here we'll need to type in URL created.html. Before that, we'll need to type in request and finally we'll need to pass in our context dictionary, and in here we'll basically have to put in chars in quotation marks, colon, and then random chars. And now we've rendered our URL created web page. But now, as I said before, this create short URL function gets executed twice. The first time is with a GET request, and the second time is with a POST request. So right now we've only put in the logic for our POST request, and now we have to do the same for our GET request. So we just need to make sure our next conditional is going to be on the same line. Add a new line, and now we'll need to type in else, and we'll need to render out a blank form that we'll pass to the user. So form equals create new short URL, open parentheses, close parentheses. And since we don't have any data in here, we just create a blank form, which we will later pass to the user. And so now what we'll need to type in is context equals, make a new dictionary, and then here we'll need to type in form, put a colon, and put in our form. And so this is the key right here, and this is the value, and we'll be accessing this key inside our HTML file. So now finally what we'll need to do is we'll need to type in return render request, and then we'll need to render our actual create.html file, and we'll need to pass in context. And the reason why we're rendering create.html is because we actually need to render out the form, and create.html is the one that actually contains this form. So if we look at forms.py quickly, we see that there is a actual field in here, and that will be the one that gets passed into this form.asp tag. But you might be wondering what this asp at the end means. And asp basically will render this out as p tags, so it won't be as big as, say, an h1 or anything else. So that's just basically a method that Django has implemented in our forms, which is again another reason why we're using our model forms and not anything else. So now let's actually see how this thing works. So now let's go type in python manage.py run server. Click enter. Now run the server. So now let's open up a new browser. And we'll just need to go to localhost, port 8000. And you can see that we actually have our website. Let's go click create new URL. And you see that there is this cool original URL box that we see here. Let me just put in a random website, say this autofill suggestion that I had, and I click create. So now let's see what's wrong here. Oh, I just realized what we'll need to do is go back in here, and we need to go into our actual while loop and take this conditional out and put that in here. So basically what this does is it will check the length of this thing and check if that's not equal to 0, and if it isn't, then it will go through this loop. And the only reason why it wouldn't be 0 is if there was another URL with the exact same short URL. And my previous mistake was I put that inside the len statement. So it's trying to do a conditional inside the len statement, which just wouldn't work out. So now if we go back and refresh the page, we'll have to continue submission. And let's check what's wrong again here. So this is the debugging that we'll have to do. So ShortURL got an unexpected keyword argument, original URL, and that's probably in views.py, which is at line 32. So let's go down into our line 32. And it's saying that it got an unknown keyword called original URL inside that box. So these two fields match. So I'm going to pause the recording and figure out what's up. So now I just realized what the problem is. It was just a small typo on my part. I spelled original wrong. I just need to add another I here. And if I refresh this page, click continue, we see that this is our no short URL. So if we copy the characters and paste that in place of create, it will take us to docs.google.com, and it actually redirected us to the page. So bugs like these can come up all the time, and a good programmer will know how to fix it by reading the stack trace and any errors that they get. So that is the end of this tutorial and the end of our Django short URL project tutorial series. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.